Welcome back, everybody, to Day 5 Inspired Conference Future of Sustainability with Dipti Kumar. The theme for the session is the collective impact model for systemic change. In these unprecedented times, we have seen the power of collaboration and community coming together. For this Future of Sustainability session with Dipti, we will be deep diving into understanding how the collective impact model organically has a built-in sustainability ethos that also aligns itself perfectly with the SDGs. Dipti is a sustainability consultant and change advocate who is passionate about empowerment of underprivileged communities, particularly involved in issues pertaining to education, equity. Dipti is a Kazana Scholar alumnus who read law at King's College, London. Currently, she serves as the CEO of the Malaysian Collective Impact Initiative, an NGO that promotes collective synergies across multiple stakeholders as a sustainable method of impactful change within the education landscape. MCII, Malaysian Collective Impact Initiative, works on shifting the needle in literacy in Malaysia and influences policy change through a data-driven, community-led approach. In this session, Dipti will be elaborating on the 5 cogs within the collective impact machinery and on inclusion and community culture and mapping. We invite you right now to enjoy this information-packed session coming up. Welcome, Dipti Kumar, to Inspired Conference, Future of Sustainability, the Collective Impact Model for Systemic Change. Hello, Dipti.
Hi, Vanita. Thank you for having me. I am glad to be here on Day 5, Future of Sustainability, and to be talking more about how we can, collaboratively drive sustainability today and in the future.
Dipti is a sustainability consultant and change advocate who is passionate about empowerment of underprivileged communities. Currently CEO of MCII, one of the youngest CEOs I know, Malaysian Collective Impact Initiative, and she is a passionate grassroots activator and advocate for community engagement. Dipti, I know you have worked with the Queen's Young Leaders Program. You've worked with the United Nations in the UN Changemakers Program in Geneva. And you are also project manager for a social enterprise project in Nepal. Tell us a little bit about your journey and why you decided to become involved in sustainability and community engagement.
So I come from a single parent family, and since I was young, I think my mom always emphasized education, and she always ensured that although things may be difficult in other areas of life, that when it came to education, we had what we needed and the tools that we required to really explore our potential. So I think it really started there, because over the years, through the opportunities, when I got a scholarship from Malaysia to go abroad to complete my degree at King's College London. And I think just realizing through my own experiences how education, exposure, being given the right tools to explore your personal individual potential can really change lives. And I realized that sometimes circumstances of birth can determine that for people. And that's something that didn't sit very well with me. So then I started my journey of exploring what education equity meant to me as a person, but also what it meant to me in terms of what I want to contribute to society around me in this lifetime. So long story short, while I was reading law at King's College London, somehow I constantly found myself being affiliated to or, dabbling in projects that involve social development, particularly in the areas of education equity. And over time, and as I was, spending more time in these areas, I got an opportunity to be an advisor to the royal family in England to develop the Queen's Young Leaders Program, as we mentioned earlier. And I also had an opportunity to be a co-chair for the UN Changemakers at the UN in Geneva, which brought young voices to policy making at the UN. I had done all of this, completed my master's, but there was something in me that said, I should go back to my country, to be part of, the soil and land that sort of I grew up on. I did feel like it was a really important part of my journey to travel the world, meet lots of different people, and work in different areas of the world. Only then was I able to garner the skills, the tools, the knowledge, the limited knowledge that I have so far, to be able to come back to Malaysia and continue that journey of learning, but also trying to apply some of these things here. Also, I find Malaysia to be actually very vibrant. I think it has experienced a lot of rapid growth, especially in the startup industry. And when you talk about sustainability, people are very dynamic. And I didn't want to miss out on that wave in my own country. So that's why I'm here. When I found MCII, I felt like it was a total blessing, because I felt like it brought together my different strengths and skills and my passion at the same time. So yeah, that is why I'm back in Malaysia, working hard to drive sustainability, and particularly in the education equity agenda.
Thank you, Dipti. And diving right in, around the efforts of the containment of COVID-19, what has been the response to address this crisis?
Yeah. So, I mean, as all of us around the world moved into 2020, people were excited. We're approaching a new decade. People are looking forward to what they're going to do next, how to move forward in life. And 2020 is a year that a lot of people spoke about in the past, and what we want to achieve by 2020. And suddenly, COVID-19 hit us, right? And we were hit with the global pandemic. And everyone suddenly had to find themselves like, everyone's plans were destroyed, whether you're an individual unit, family, businesses, companies, or as a country, right? Everyone had to take a step back, firstly, refigure out what their priorities were, what all of our priorities are at that point, and how we are going to align to addressing this problem, which is COVID, which not only can kill, not only we should avoid because it can kill us, but also we need to eradicate. So suddenly everyone's lives were brought to a halt, and people had to come together to address this. And of course, human beings, we are very adaptable. We constantly survive in different situations. So it was interesting to see how different countries around the world took on different approaches and methods to addressing this pandemic. I can't say I am an expert in how to handle pandemics. I'm not speaking from that point of view, but I think that it's actually a really good case study to showcase to people actually how the collective impact model first started out of an organic, real, practical need, and how actually this level of collaboration that is planned, that is measured, that is organized, can really drive long-term sustainable change that affects all sectors of society. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go a little bit into, I'm going to start sharing a little bit about COVID-19 and what has happened. So collective responsibility, sustained impact. So as I mentioned earlier, we experienced a pandemic in the 20th century, right? We have experienced pandemics in the past, and it was interesting to see how human beings used all the different methods and tools, and especially technology, to address coronavirus and try to contain it. Here, I put together some graphs from different categories of countries from the website endcoronavirus.org. And if you see in the first category up there, we see COVID-19 containment, countries that are nearly there. So countries that could have done a bit more or can and should be doing more in the future to ensure that the COVID situation is better contained. Countries like China, South Korea, and the UK. And mind you, China and South Korea at the start were said to be one of the better performing countries in containing COVID. And then you look at the second category, which is countries that need to take action. Countries like Bangladesh, Japan, and the US. And in fact, many people were surprised that a country like Japan is in this category. And if you can see now, in terms of countries beating COVID-19, we have Finland, Malaysia, and New Zealand, just to name a few. I don't think any country is able to say we have successfully eliminated COVID, maybe except New Zealand. But just a disclaimer that COVID-19 is something we will always have to deal with. And this is just what countries have been doing so far. So now, if we look at this array of countries, and there's been so many opinion pieces, analysis done on how different countries have handled the situation differently. But there actually, if you look a bit deeper, there are some common success factors that apply to those countries that were able to contain COVID in a much more efficient and sustainable way. So the first I would like to talk about is the common goal, right? So we do see this in general amongst most of the countries, that there's a common goal. Now, what is our common goal when it comes to COVID? We all want to, number one, avoid getting infected by COVID as an individual. And number two, we want to eliminate COVID on a global scale, right? So there's a common goal. Everyone knows this. Everyone's trying to work towards it. But a common goal alone is not enough, right? One of the other success factors, if you look at what happened in Finland and New Zealand, and of course in Malaysia too, that there is the source of strategic, reliable, and understandable data. So in this 21st century, it's a data world. There's so much data available everywhere all the time. But we do need to be strategic about the kind of data that we are measuring and the kind of data that we're putting out there. Because, if you do not measure and communicate data that's supposed to actually communicate that specific metric, then you're actually not going to be able to get the message across that you're trying to with that. So if you look at the data that was communicated, they were strategic, meaning they were relevant. They were reliable, so there was, a sense of public trust in the information that was going out there. There was a sense of honesty as well in those that were disseminating data. And finally, understandable. Data needs to be something that the layman public can absorb, understand, and apply in their daily lives. The third factor I'd like to talk about is constant communication and reiteration. We can have strategic, reliable data, we can have a common goal, but if there's no constant communication across the different sectors of society, how are we going to get this data across, right? How are people going to understand what's happening on the ground? How are people going to be empowered with the information to decide what to do next to address this problem or to achieve this goal? So if we turn on the TV, especially during the heights of the first wave of the pandemic, TVs in all different languages around different countries were talking about COVID. What is the virus? All the latest research we're getting about it. What are the latest infection rates? Which are the areas, as live as possible, which are the areas that have high infection rates? And also other information on SOPs, how do you do physical distancing? There was constant communication and reiteration across all sectors of society, not only in the media, not only in the newspaper, all over social media, in family groups, in business and corporations and foundations. There was constant communication and reiteration of this common goal, which is eradicate COVID. They were communicating strategic, reliable, understandable data. And now, so that's the third factor. I'm going to go into the fourth one, which is cross-sector and cross-society collaborations, and hence reinforcing each other's activities. So what's happening next? When you start empowering people with data and information that's reliable and people trust, and people come from different sectors of society, individuals feel empowered to do something about this. This is a cause that matters to me. I have the information to process and analyze this as an individual, and I can then, identify what resources I have as an individual to partake and collaborate and contribute to this. So what we started seeing was suddenly large-scale manufacturers who had large plants. They were like, let's turn our manufacturing plants overnight into PPE manufacturing plants. There were designers that started getting their tailors to start making PPE. There were refugee groups who are one of the most marginalized who got together to start managing PPE. There were volunteers who went in to clear medical facilities. There were NGOs that tried to fill in gaps when it came to, supporting homeless or really poor communities. So we start seeing cross-sector collaboration reinforcing activities, not only in the private sector or amongst the general public, but also in the public sector, right? You see the Ministry of Health taking the lead in terms of advisory and SOP, in terms of management of hospitals and clinics. You see them working together with the other ministries to disseminate information, make sure data is reliable. You see the leader of the country taking a leadership role in making decisions and disseminating information and directing this whole collective, so to speak, in the direction that we need to. So it's about all these different puzzle pieces coming together.
Absolutely, Dipti. Thank you. And I think one of the most key, most important pillar within the scope and scale of collective cross collaboration. You know, continuous communication. We know that we've been advocating that for, you know, all of the initiatives around collective impact. And Dipti, can you talk a little bit more about successfully mobilizing assistance, and what are the challenges faced in this area?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Successfully mobilizing assistance?
And the challenges faced in this area.
So I think if we can talk about a pre-COVID and a post-COVID world. Yeah. So we talk about pre-MCO, pre-COVID. What are the challenges in operationalization? Basically, you need to then look at the structures and the frameworks that hold the sustainability of social development area in place, right? So there's a system and structure. So you have funders, you have corporate funders, you have government funders, and you have international bodies that fund. And then you have NGOs or service providers or deliverers who carry out programs on the ground. And then you have the communities themselves who ought to be represented, who are going to be receiving, you know, all of this. And then you have the government whose policy you need to align to. So when you look at this whole system and you realize that there are actually gaps, little gaps here and there that need to be filled. And if we don't bridge these gaps, then this system is not going to function in a way that drives sustainability. Right? So if I were to summarize, what are the challenges in operationalizing a collective impact in this sense? It actually comes down to mindset, number one. If you refer back to the few common success factors I mentioned earlier about the countries in handling COVID, you would see that what is key is that everyone is on the same page. There's a mindset to drive this long-term goal, this long-term social agenda, and there's an understanding that we need to do this together. So I think if I were to summarize everything in one word, it would be mindset shift. Of course, with every project, with everything we embark on, there are going to be challenges and obstacles. But I believe that those can be addressed, especially if all of us work towards being on the same mindset of all working together for a better future.
Absolutely, Dipti, yes. And we know in the systems change agenda, there is the implicit, the semi-implicit, and the explicit tiers, where the very final tier is mindset shifts and how important it is. Yeah, can you share some ideas on what is being done within the collective impact community that you're working in to enable the recipients from moving from a fixed mindset into a growth mindset? Thank you, Dipti. And we know that mindset shifts are one of the most key ingredient, key characteristic that will determine success within the collective impact initiative. Across the systems change agenda as well, we have the explicit, semi-explicit, and implicit tiers, where the very final tier in mindset shifts is one of the most crucial, critical, and difficult one to implement. Can you share a little bit on what you're doing within the community that you're working in on enabling shifting from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset community engagement? Yeah.
I could summarize our efforts in many different ways pre-MCO, but I would actually like to add a slightly different tangent to this question. Because what has happened is, because of COVID-19, of course, it's tragic and it's unfortunate. We lost many human lives. But of course, there's always positives whenever, you know, we are facing a problem as tragic as it is. And actually what has happened is, I feel like COVID-19 itself has actually caused a mindset shift amongst a lot of people, that for us, MCI, those that we work with, but also in general amongst human beings. We find that COVID-19 made people really question and think about, when it comes to education, for example, what actually really matters at the end of the day. You know, right now, our children cannot go to school. If COVID-19 continues, if we see surges in the future, their formal form of education is going to be affected. So parents, teachers, school leaders, the education systems, people had to start asking themselves, so actually by the end of today, or by the end of this year, what do these students need to survive next year, and the following year, and the following year, and in the future? So I think people going down to these basic important questions of what education means, or what being in a family unit means, what a business can look like without having everyone sitting in the office. All these questions that arose, which challenged a lot of our basic natural instincts and behavioral patterns, actually pushed people forward. So I can say that we have put in a lot of efforts to drive that mindset shift, but what was most impactful in actually getting the mindset there was actually COVID-19. So what did we do as MCII during COVID-19? We made sure that the communities, that number one, we were genuinely there to support the communities and their needs during this time of a humanitarian crisis. But number two, that the community saw and felt that they were represented, that also their needs were understood, and that we are going to be there during the tough times and the good times.
Thank you, Dipti. There are three crucial cogs within the collective impact machinery. What are they and why are they significant?
So I would definitely love to delve into these three crucial cogs, but let me start this section by firstly talking about sustainability. All of you participants who are here today are here as part of day 5, Future of Sustainability. And we need to go back to firstly, what's the meaning of sustainability, right? I think
Absolutely.
A lot of people think we know what it means, myself included. But also we need to realize that language changes over time. The meanings of words change based on use. And the word sustainability has been used a lot in the past decade. It's been thrown around by corporations, it's been used by government, it's used by environmental bodies, it's used in science, it's used in literacy. So we need to go down to what sustainability means. So what is my message to you as well as participants? I had to ask myself, right, to make sure that this session is valuable. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, sustainability, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, is the quality of being able to continue over a period of time, right? So the quality, I think the word quality there is quite important. And also the second thing I would like to point out about this definition is that it's able to continue over a period of time. It doesn't say forever, because how forever is forever, we want to look infinite. But basically, when we talk about sustainability in the social development space and for MCII or in my other consultancy, when we talk about sustainability, we talk about sustainability of something lasting as long as possible. We look mostly at cultural shifts, mindset changes, and we talk about the quality of that change. So that is going to be the basis on which I talk about sustainability for the rest of the presentation. So now to talk about the three important cogs, I wanted to go back to the coronavirus case study, right? When you use something, when you have those 5 key success factors that come together and you analyze what are the benefits of handling it in this way, might I just add now before we move into those 5 common success factors are actually the 5 key factors of a collective impact. And that is what collective impacts are. Collective impact started off in the US organically and naturally out of a need to address a social problem. And they needed everyone to work together to address that. So here I just want to talk about a few of the concepts or the cogs, as you mentioned, that actually make collective impact a very useful and functional framework for people who want to drive sustainability in any social development area. So firstly, we talk about sustainability, great, sustainability of impact, right? So if you look at the second section there, sustainability of impact, you drive deep-rooted solutions, you ensure sustainability of project impact beyond project completion. Meaning, if there's sustainable change in a community, it should happen beyond your project, not when a project exits or an intervention exits, the impact dies down again. So that is one of the benefits of this particular model, but also sustainability of the model itself. The collective impact model is something that's easily replicable, so you can model this somewhere else, or it's also easily extended, whether it's extended over a duration of time or whether it's extended in terms of expanding, in terms of space, demographics. So it's quite a flexible model, but it does take a long time to get it going at the start because of mindset. Number two, why the collective impact model is actually quite successful in driving long-term change and large-scale change. It's because of this concept of mutual responsibility. So firstly, co-ownership of a project or of a social intervention, right? When you talk about co-ownership of impact means all stakeholders involved are pushing towards achieving it. All stakeholders involved in that particular collective impact, that particular social agenda, take it upon themselves to have an equal responsibility as everyone else in driving this agenda. For us at MCII, it's literacy. Every single one of our steering committee members, our service delivery partners, and it's also driving that amongst teachers and partners in schools, is that the literacy agenda, improving the literacy rate in Malaysia and in Klang, where we work, is something that we all are mutually responsible towards. I can take an active role. And the same if you look back at the case study earlier, right? COVID. Co-ownership or mutual responsibility meant every single individual, company, organization felt a sense of responsibility to act or commit. Some could only act in their own capacity, which was important enough, staying away from other people, staying indoors, staying at home. Some people or some organizations had manufacturing plants. So they said, not only can I stay safe and physical distance with, from others, but I can also contribute by creating PPE, rubber gloves, medical equipment. So that co-ownership or the mutual responsibility of all stakeholders means it drives higher possibility of success. And let's not forget, all social development projects, whether it's in literacy or in any other area, they all require resources and funding. It is one of the key driving factors of the system that I mentioned earlier, right? And when you have this sense of mutual responsibility, you have a reliance on mutual strengths and mutual resources. So your most synergizing efforts, it reduces your cost, increases your cost efficiency, and most importantly, there's a reduction of wastage because you are capitalizing on synergies and strengths of respective stakeholders. And finally, the most important, I think, amongst of the cogs, of course, they all have to exist together, but the most important is systemic change. Why? Because we all know that as human beings, we live in a system that we have created, a system that serves us. And whenever we want to improve on a particular social area, and for us in literacy, for MCIs in literacy, and for everyone else in other social, who have other social agendas, to have lasting sustainable change, we need to look at systemic level change. That's how it's going to be sustainable. The collective impact model includes and addresses all stakeholders from the micro ecosystem, neighborhoods, communities, schools, parents, all the way down to the macro, the largest, the macro ecosystem, from ministers, policymakers, the machinery of the system. And finally, systemic change is not just engaging the whole ecosystem, but the most difficult type of systemic change is cultural and community type of change, right? It is the most difficult to achieve, and the collective impact sets out to achieve this change.
Yes, Dipti, and this is a proven model concept. I know that is actively being activated on the ground, and to prove concept, the team I know works really hard to get this going with communities, with ministry, with educators. And mutual responsibility, co-ownership of impact is we've talked about redefining CSR, corporate social responsibility, into collective impact initiative responsibility, because without that cross collaboration, we find there are a lot of barriers, there are a lot of roadblocks. You can put in as much funding, as much speciality, and I think manpower into a program and initiative, but if there isn't that cross communication and willingness to work, it comes to a screeching halt. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners listening today, Dipti, how does one operationalize a collective impact?
So Now let me go into collective impact, what and how, right? So I mentioned earlier, if you remember the case study I did, the coronavirus case study, I mentioned some common success factors. And if you look at this slide where it outlines the 5 key factors for collective impact as outlined by Stanford University, you will understand why I related the COVID situation to what a collective impact looks like, to really drive that practical understanding of the need for large-scale collaboration to drive lasting social change. And here we go, a simple, achievable, practical framework to help people achieve this. So I'm going to run through them quickly. The first one is having a common agenda. So everyone is part of this collective, people who have a common agenda. They have a shared vision for change. So I will talk now more about MCII as an example to showcase this to people. For us at MCII, the Malaysian Collective Impact Initiative, we were founded by a group of funders who got together, corporate funders who got together and realized that, you know what, we're all individually investing a lot in education, but we want to see that needle shift a lot more faster. And at the same time, we want to see how we can get a higher return on investment in terms of impact when we work together, stronger voice when it comes to policy making. So here we go, a group of people who had a common agenda. They want to improve the education system. They have a shared vision and they have a common understanding of the problem as corporate funders, right? And then you go into what else do you need to make this work? Shared measurements. So data is a very key component of collective impact. Not only does data have to be measured, it has to be measured strategically, it has to be measured in a reliable way. But beyond that, it's always useful to have metrics and data that is measured across the different stakeholders, because shared accountability. How do we encourage mutual responsibility? From the earlier slide that we were discussing, you need to have shared accountability, and shared accountability comes from, you know, having a shared data that is collected and collecting data with standard metrics across the collective. The third one is mutually reinforcing activities, meaning different stakeholders and different organizations, partners of the collective can have different roles. For example, with MCII, we have a Hong Leong Foundation, who is one of our steering committee members, founders, and funders, and they have a very strong passion in addressing special education needs. So they fund MCII, their passion is in special education needs, and that's how they continue to, that's what they continue to push for as part of their foundation agenda, you know? And then we have other stakeholders to whom different areas of education plays an important role. For example, with YTL Foundation, getting children involved in tech education through also Frog VLE, getting, you know, virtual learning classrooms into schools all over Malaysia. So YTL Foundation, they care about education, they want to drive it forward, they have this particular differentiated approach. Does not mean that they can't work together through a coordination of joint plan of action, which is what we do at MCII. We are this group of people from different sectors and different spaces and different capacities who care about education. We have these set of resources. We are here to coordinate, manage, connect, and enable that space by being the executor of the joint plan of action. And finally, number 4, continuous communication. As I mentioned earlier, if the whole COVID situation, let's imagine that there was no communication, or it was not constant, or it was once a week, and it was limited to only one platform or distribution channel. Like, how are we going to keep that message going? How are we going to keep reiterating? How are we going to keep people updated on the situation to empower individuals to take action? So continuous communication is really important across the different stakeholders. And as we are all human beings, the first thing we need to establish is trust, an actual individual level of trust amongst this collective. And it can be done online, as we saw through coronavirus. It can be done through like working with the government. You can have a collective that is much smaller in scale, working only in a specific area, and it's done through like face-to-face. But continuous communication is important. And finally, backbone support. It's basically a separate independent organization that is the enabler, connector, and sort of the strategist in this space. And that is where the backbone organization is, which is what MCII is. to our literacy collective.
Yeah, and if you almost envision these siloed spaces and organizations all working with the same focus, with the same core, with the same kind of resource and funding, but individually and not in collaboration. But here is a model that will bridge all of those organizations together and pull it into one pot per se. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dipti. We're going to deep dive a little bit further into community engagement, community mapping, and community culture. Can you speak a little bit about this? Because I know MCII has been quite innovative in building creative tools and toolkits for community mapping and engagement and community culture identification. Yeah.
So to talk a little bit about community culture and the needs to fully represent community needs, I think it's quite an important discussion on its own. So I'll try to give it justice. Firstly, when it comes to collective impact, when I first came on board MCI has been around for a number of years, and I came aboard MCII probably a few years after its inception, so halfway through, if you look at the start until now. And one of the things that I found really important and that I felt like my predecessors were really able to do well was not to just simply transplant this model called the collective impact from the US into Malaysia. You know, that's actually one of the reasons why organizations who have tried to implement or start collective impacts in different areas and regions around the world have not been able to make it last. They have successfully started it, and after 2 to 3 years, it shuts down. Why does that happen? Many reasons, but one of them is because you cannot simply transplant this model into another country. This model, collective impact, started off in the US out of an organic need, and how they went about it, how they went about achieving their goals, would have been quite specific to that community, that country, that culture. But there's much to learn about the model, which is why the 5 factors earlier is all we need. How we actually execute those factors, you know, for example, continuous communication. Different countries or different communities would do it differently. Some people may prefer, like, some people are more like WhatsApp. They want to use an app on their phone to keep in touch in groups. Some people want regular face-to-face meetings. You know, and this depends entirely on the language, the culture, the type of expectations that are built in that particular society and community. So that's the first thing I'd like to talk about. Collective impact, sometimes using the word model, makes people think that it's a one-size-fits-all, and that's not how it is. It is definitely something you can utilize in different sectors of society and countries to drive sustainability and impact. But we should never go in with the mindset where we are going to do exactly this here. The second thing I would like to talk about when it comes to community culture and inclusion is a very core part of what collective impact is inclusion, meaning everyone who's part of this journey is included, has an equal voice and an equal platform to raise this voice, right? Whether it comes to differences in language, differences in access to whether it's technology or being able to actually attend meetings and have their voices heard. So a core part of what we make sure we do as the backbone organization is that we make sure we don't go in with an arrogant mindset thinking we know what is best for the community. The community that we support is comprised of a diverse number of individual human beings. And we like to give respect to that by making sure that we constantly find out from them what their needs are. We can drive the agenda of literacy, but we can't tell them how best, or we can't be arrogant to say we know what are their challenges. You know, so for us, make sure we try to really represent what the views are of the beneficiaries, the communities who are directly impacted. And in that sense, make sure also everyone feels a sense of collective responsibility to this social agenda because it matters for all of society, right? So now if I may just go down to this slide, just to give the participants a bit of an idea of I'm talking about big concepts, right? How do you actually put this out in a plan? So in any social project or any social agenda, and for us, it is eradicating illiteracy in Malaysia. First, you identify what the social objectives are. So when you go back to the collective impact factors, number one, you identify your common agenda, your common goal. So MCI, it's about eradicating illiteracy. Now, what do you do? Number two, you do this thing called community mapping. Community mapping, again, there are different ways of doing this. And you need to look at different sectors of society, starting from individuals, groups, organizations. And you sort of start mapping from a micro to a macro perspective. Who are the individuals, organizations, public bodies, teachers, sectors of society who are relevant to this particular agenda? Now, a lot of people do community mapping for beneficiaries, but they forget that it's a whole system. For any agenda we're trying to achieve, there's a whole system in place that we need to work with and need to address what the gaps of this system are. So when you do community mapping, the community mapping cannot be just of the beneficiaries alone or those impacted by this project. It needs to be of everyone else, all the NGOs in the space, the public bodies, you know, the relevant religious authorities who could be interested in the literacy agenda, you know, getting the local community leaders to be interested in the literacy. So really doing a mapping of everyone beyond just the beneficiaries and the executors of the project. Then of course you have a community town hall. A community town hall is how you actually, number one, build trust amongst everyone present. But number two, you also start this journey of continuous communication. You start getting, so in your, once you do a community town hall, it's more of understanding the needs of the community, making sure they are represented not only to the backbone organization, but to everyone else at the table. All the community leaders, all the public bodies, all the corporate foundations are at that same table. And communities are able to speak for themselves and say, these are our needs, these are our problems. So everyone's at the same table, right? And then you move into your first round table. Now, what happens at the round table? Here we understand the community needs already. Members have already met each other. It's not 100% trust yet at this stage, but there is a sense of, you know, we know who each other are. So first round table includes all members of the community town hall from before, and you start working, you start a formation of a working group. Now, when you start a formation of a working group, what do? As individual organizations or people, you start identifying what are your key assets. You know, what can I contribute to this? What can I contribute? What is my role in this particular collective? And then a signing of an MOU, of course, which is more of a sense of commitment and collective responsibility. And then you start working action plans and timelines, you know? And then, of course, you have subsequent roundtables. And normally you do have an expected end date for your project. And at the end date of your project, you discuss outcomes, you measure success. Your data needs to be accurately measured. You need to have feedback post-mortem. And most importantly, policymakers should be engaged at all stages, especially here, and then learnings and next steps for the future. So there are many ways of implementing a collective impact. This is just to showcase to you how by building out a project in an organized and cohesive way, including everyone, I can actually outline to you how we can hit all those 5 key factors of a collective impact through this particular slide.
Thank you, Dipti. And we know for any, inclusion, equity, and access discussion and agenda, you cannot, not have the community at the table. They're always sometimes at the door knocking, and people need to realize that you need to have them inside the room at the table, having these discussions, and hence the power of this type of engagement. Can we now talk about a CEO of collective impact in education for this region? How has the work you have helped pioneer to address the current shifts needed for this post-pandemic era?
Yeah. So basically, I'm going to talk a bit about MCII first, and then talk about what are the shifts and how we aim to address them. MCII, of course, as you mentioned before, is the Malaysian Collective Impact Initiative. It is actually the first collective impact in this region, in the Asian region. And what we are is we're a collective for systemic education transformation in Malaysia. But our main on-the-ground goal is to eradicate illiteracy in Malaysia, right? And we're starting, of course, with Klang, which is the direct community we support with. And of course, we are trying to reduce the number of that 95% of children in MCI are reading behind their proficiency levels to 65% within the next few years. Just to showcase to you what a collective impact network looks like, this is what our network is. We have our communities and beneficiaries right in the middle, surrounded by our steering committee, who are the core either founders and or funders of MCII, and then we also have our external partners, and of course we work constantly in collaboration with the different public bodies. At the bottom you'll see the District Education Office, you'll see the Innovation Agency of Malaysia, and our Ministry of Education. Before I can talk more about the shifts, I think we need to understand a little bit of context. So if I may share some, this is a slide by which has statistics from the educational data sector, the EPRD, which is our statistics department. And if you look at the bottom right, you will see that the literacy rate in Malaysia was quantified at 95 to about 96% across all those years. But if we look a bit closely, we will notice that the definition of literacy below that, it says has received formal education. Now, this is interesting, firstly, to look at this number, because Singapore, which is the neighboring country in Malaysia, has a literacy rate of 99%. They are one of the top in the world. And if Malaysia is a 95 or 96% literacy rate, we shouldn't see the drastic changes in actual ability to communicate between two neighboring countries as we do. So when you actually realize that we measure literacy based on school enrollment, which means if the child is enrolled in school, the child is literate. And yes, this was a way to quantify literacy at some point in the past, but this is one of those things that we need to now change and update. To share, this is a little bit of data from the communities that we work with in our proof of concept, which is in Klang. And I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to go into the details, so basically you can see that 95% of students tested are reading behind the expected proficiency levels, 95%. And it is a known thing now that we do have a literacy issue in Malaysia, especially when it comes to the English language. So at MCII, we adopt the UNESCO literacy definition. But something interesting for us is that we've not been able to go down to the deeper meaning of literacy, which is being able to compute, interpret, involving continuum of learning to achieve their goals. We are still now working on the basics of literacy, which is being able to identify, read, communicate, with written materials, spoken text. So we're still trying to address this gear of the whole machinery when it comes to Malaysia. Strategic objectives of MCII, as you can see, we go really from micro to macro. We need to make sure that from on the ground, in the communities, that in the sector and in the space across collaborations, we're promoting effectiveness. And finally, when we look macro on policy and government level, we are really trying to advocate and work with them for evidence-based policies. So as of now, we've had more than 4 million ringgit in total in-school investment value. We've had more than 41 programs, but of course, our programs have become more focused and strategic over time. So you can see the number of people, students, teachers, and stakeholders engaged. And when we say stakeholders, we mean all the community members, community leaders, people in the space. And of course, at the bottom, you can see we've had also some important discussions when it comes to influencing policy in this space. Now, we have a very strategic literacy plan in each one of the schools that we work with. We bring all the sectors and stakeholders in the schools, surrounding the schools, communities, the District Education Office to be directly involved and to own these projects in collaboration with us and other service delivery partners. But then in the macro ecosystem, we also collect this data. We share them with corporate funders to understand what's going on the ground for the sake of sharing reliable data with the rest of the space. But then we also work together with the government on the federal side to share this information and talk about how can we collaborate to drive this impact on a more national, scalable way. So that is how MCII works, and I hope I've given a good gist of it over the past few minutes. But then when COVID hit, and we are now experiencing post-pandemic shifts, we had to, I remember there was just 2 or 3 days where everyone in the world was, what do we do? All organizations, businesses, governments had to shut. Family units were indoors, no going out. So everyone had to figure out, okay, what do we do? And we had to go through that process at MCII as well as a collective. So although our clear mandate is in literacy and surrounding that systemic education, when COVID hit, we took a step back and realized, what? We have a network of, we have communities who we support, this network of community members and leaders who are struggling right now. Firstly, we're trying to disseminate information on online education, but then we realized these communities, these people we work with, these human beings, they are thinking about how are they going to get food on the table the next day and the next few weeks, because their sources of income were affected by MCO indefinitely at that period of time. And they were concerned about how to get food on the table for kids. And here we are talking to them on a totally different tangent about how to get the kids to engage in online education. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, first you need to fulfill your basic health, safety, security needs: food, water, oxygen, shelter. Only when you can fulfill these needs do you have enough capacity and space and ability to then move on to your other needs, which is mental stimulation, learning, growth, things like that. So we decided, let's find out from the community first. Let's not go in arrogantly again and imagine what problems they're having. Let's find out. So on this slide, you can see some of the summary data of what we collected. And I'm not going to touch on everything, but just a few things that we got was, number one, most parents do not have stable jobs or flow of income. So they do not have any savings to even pay bills, pay rent, and for basic essential items. And common essential items needed mostly by them were dry food items, toiletries, laundry detergent, really basic things to survive in a house. More than 75% of our community members have between 5 to 8 family members at home. More than 65% earn less than 2,000 ringgit. And more than 85% noted that their source of income has decreased. More than 70% of those do not have enough basic needs and essentials. And if you look at the number on the right, it's interesting. 6 respondents were made redundant. Now, 6 respondents were made redundant seems like an interesting number. It looks like very few of them actually lost their jobs. The reason is because most of these beneficiaries, what they do to get income are odd jobs. Lorry driver, being a taxi driver, helping out at the factory nearby, helping out with community and neighborhood projects, logistics, simple logistics projects. So they may not have been made redundant, but they still lost their source of income. So here we got an idea of really how dire the situation is. And then this next slide also, we want to understand more when it comes to education, because we are an education collective at the end of the day. We found that more than 70% of our beneficiaries do not have good internet access at home. We're not surprised because this is something we knew from before. Around 60% of children did study at home using school books or online, while 26% of them blatantly said no. And finally, do your children or students have access to smartphones, phones, laptops? Around 50% of them do not have access to these gadgets, and most of them who do use their parents' smartphones. So we knew that there was also a problem when it came to internet access.
Digital divide, yeah.
Yeah. So what do we need to do? We realized, what? We have the network, we have the resources, we have, the access to funding out there. We have access to working with the public sector, with the Ministry of Education. We work with the schools, with the communities. We need to take a step back during a humanitarian crisis where people are concerned about having food on the table to survive. We need to go back to basics. Not only do we do it because we felt there was a genuine need from the community, but also because we wanted to showcase to them, like, we are here to support and fulfill the gaps that you have. And if we can work together in this collectively and equally, this is how we will continue to work together in the future. It was also a continuous trust building relationship. So somehow we managed to pull off this very tedious, lot of logistical sort of sections of this project of delivering basic household needs. We were able to support 1,434 families with basic grocery needs during MCO. And coming up in 1 or 2 months' time, we're going to have a post-MCO support for our communities as well. What is that going to look like? Again, we're going to reach out to the communities and ask them, what do they need most at this time to support their growth and journey in the future? So that is how we had our immediate response to the pandemic. Now, once this project was ongoing and we started seeing families, communities, individuals, teachers, schools that we were supporting becoming more settled and stable about what's going on, and having addressed more of their basic needs, which is like food, survival, safety, and health, then we were able to start talking more about education. So if you want to talk about how have we been resetting objectives or moving forward, I don't think we've had to reset any of our literacy objectives at all. In fact, I think what we did during MCO, during the height of the pandemic, which is really showcasing our true commitment to the community that we're supporting, but also showcasing that we do have the network and the stakeholders to make things happen, and COVID making people's mindset shift because of the needs of like a pandemic new normal life. All of these together actually pushed us forward. I would say that it's really driven our impact forward by maybe even 1 or 2 years. We have an increased sense of ownership from the communities that we are supporting. We have an increased understanding from the school system and the school community of what MCI is trying to achieve, and an increased sense of confidence in the journey that we're taking. So we only had to reset our objectives for a temporary short period of time. But in the long term, I feel like our objectives of eradicating illiteracy, if they don't remain the same, actually is much more solidified and has a stronger foundation at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Dipti, and having had a deeper insight as one of the stakeholder management group team members for MCII, and building and working with the team in these communities to build a foundation for where you have reached. It hasn't come overnight, and I myself have seen and experienced and gone through the journey of that first 2.5 years of just building trust. We could not do anything else other than build trust within communities, within the network partners, the service providers, the educational ministries that we were working with, the PPDs, the education district officers that we were working with. And all of that time was spent in communication again to build trust. Yeah, if you could share a little bit more on how that strong foundation in trust building was able to now give you a very a trusted position in the community that you work with, in sense of having impact and shifting the needle, as you have said.
Yeah, so definitely an important part of being able to drive the success today. I wouldn't say that we are 100% successful, because a collective impact is a journey, and it's a long-term journey. So I don't like the moment you say, oh, we're successful. It's easy to assume that the journey is over, but that's not the case. But the success that we have been able to achieve definitely comes from many years of, what I like to say, like drilling right to the bottom of the ground, unearthing all the roots, and of course, Vanita, you led our stakeholder management for so many years, from the time of its inception, before I was on board with MCII, up until very recently. And not only, I think, was there years of trust building, being present, interacting, showcasing our sense of commitment, showcasing not only a sense of commitment to them, but also showcasing what we stand firm for, which is the literacy journey. This is something we are committed to, we want to drive, and we need you to work together with us. I think it's about really all these different areas of stakeholder engagement from the start, constantly being present, speaking, understanding the needs, representing their needs, building trust is so important in the Asian culture, especially in Malaysia, I would say. And that is something that had to happen over a duration of years. But what had to come in together with that was, of course, data. I felt like when we had more data to showcase to the communities to empower themselves with the knowledge and information that we have, then they are able to understand better why they should or should not be part of this agenda. So I think as we started sharing more data, after the trust building journey had begun, sharing more data, but what I would like to pinpoint the most, if we want to talk about having a framework to drive this, was actually what you discovered, Vanita, the systems change framework. I didn't include systems change framework in this particular session, but it's available in the resources, because sometimes when you talk about a model, you talk about so many frameworks and concepts, you can get very clouded with what it is, which is why I really want to drive practical understanding through the coronavirus case study. But actually, Vanita, the systems change model, which gives you, if you were talking about the explicit, the implicit, and the semi-implicit, semi-explicit, a pyramid structure of how you try to actually address systems change on a mindset, individual, community level. So I think definitely years of building trust. Number one, being present, spending time, showcasing commitment, but data, reliable, open data, but having a plan as to, in this engagement, how do you build that trust? And that came through the systems change model. So yeah, these are the three things I would say when it comes to really building up to what we have been able to achieve today, from many years of hard work, being present, and driving this agenda, and sometimes sounding like we're talking to a wall, right? But of course, over the years, we've seen that change. And now we have people approaching us to talk about literacy, to talk about this problem.
Absolutely. And I think for advocates for, impact and change and sustainability, we are always looking for tools and understanding, Dipti, on how we can move, the environment. We can build a very cohesive, a very cultural, understanding, contextual understanding of what we're doing. Like you've mentioned before, it's so important. And the tools are out there, the resources are out there, the expertise are out there. We just need to, bridge that in to see what is going to work within the context of what we're doing. And that's where I found systems change to be so powerful. And also to talk a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals, I think goal 17, and we've discussed this, partnerships is one of the most difficult pillars to hit for any organization. And that's actually a collective impact first. That's the first thing that we think about. That's the first thing that we do in our messaging, in our narrative and engagements, is partnership, cross collaboration partnership.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dipti. And moving on, and a pivot a little bit to what are the key takeaway messages for our listeners today surrounding the future of sustainability?
Yeah. So just leading into that section, let me just share with you some photos, just from some of the moments we've had from our journey as a collective impact. As you can see here, this on the left, you will see some of the teachers working together. We had a teacher sharing session from one of the 21st century upskilling programs carried out by Right Education in conjunction with our schools. And on the right, you can see the students actually participating and using 21st century cognitive learning strategies in the classrooms. Here, you can see on the left and on the right some student activities that are taking place. On the right is actually a literacy diagnostics assessment that's happening as part of our literacy program. On the left is, and also the middle, is actually from our innovation projects that we carry out in school. And this particular school was very proud of a lot of the things that they created. You'll see on the right there is actually a remote control robot that also serves as an alarm system if anyone has a motion sensor, and serves an alarm system. And this boy who's 11 years old created this amazing thing from a coding project that we brought into these schools. Just to share some photos, that keep us going on a daily basis. On the right, you'll see a photo from a literacy camp that was carried out by our literacy service delivery partner, My Readers. And on the left, you will see a photo, of course, shared with permission of one of the families that we were able to support during MCO. And here on this slide, you'll see photos of different community town halls and roundtables. So we started collaborating with the Malaysian government last year, the Ministry of Education, on this project called the District Transformation Program, where they're trying to improve passing rates for Malaysian students in some particular national examinations. And they realized they need to do it in a way that gets the community to own this journey. If not, it's going to, the impact will not be as sustainable in the long term. So based on the work we've been doing in Klang and our models and what I presented to you guys today, they went all out and started using this model. And I'm proud to say we inspired a nationwide group of town halls with communities and parents and teachers to understand how to improve passing rates. But the journey does not end there. The journey is not just a town hall. It's about being sustainable, constant commitment to this, right? So yeah, those are some of the photos. We are a literacy collective, so our core is in literacy, but we do have other programs around the site to sort of address the needs of the communities, to build that trust and that relationship as well. Just to clarify, so that those who want to adopt the collective impact model don't get confused about the approach that we do take. Now, I think that puts us at a good place to talk about key takeaways. I felt like I've said so many different things during this presentation. I wanted to keep key takeaways simple. Firstly, I just want to leave everyone with a message that obviously it's not an original message, but basically a message. It takes a village to raise a child. This, of course, applies to childhood development, building ethics, values, understanding how to function in society. So building up, so it relates a lot to education of a child. But this does not just apply in education. This applies to everything that we want to achieve when it comes to the betterment of human society, and any particular social agenda, whether it comes to environmental sustainability, whether it comes to saving the turtles, whether it comes down to making the aviation industry more sustainable. It takes a whole village to address this. And actually, if we all do put in the effort to collaborate and to work with like-minded people and to drive that agenda using a model that's simple and practical, we actually will see impact happening on a larger scale and a lot faster, because a lot of the gaps in the system are addressed at the same time, rather than addressing this particular gap and then this particular gap and that particular gap at different times. So here I am just to share that, I think collaboration is key when it comes to social agenda. We should all work together. There are many ways of doing this, and collective impact is one of the ways that I believe in the most, because it gets everyone on board, everyone is included in this journey, everyone takes equal ownership, it's measured, it's strategic, there's constant communication, there's a sense of trust, it engages policymakers, So if you're looking for a way to drive sustainability, you have a social agenda or a goal you're trying to achieve, whether you're representing an organization, whether you're representing yourself as an individual, or whether you're a group of organizations, a group of people who want to achieve something, here is a simple, easy, practical model that gives you all the tools you need to achieve that long-term sustainable change, right? On our part at MCII and also at Scolaro, where I am the lead consultant, we support different organizations and foundations in different ways. Some of them come to us to find out more about collective impact project management for different social areas. Some of them want a specific support on something specific, like how do we conduct a community town hall? How do we organize action plans? And we have all of that available. So please do reach out if this is something that any of you would like to learn more about. I've included links, resources, materials, and there's actually much more you can find online about all that we've spoken about and more. So feel free to explore. And finally, thank you so much. Firstly, Vanita, thank you so much. I feel like we've had a really engaging conversation, and I feel like a lot of the essence of what I wanted to get across might not have been able to put across as clearly if you didn't ask me these really valid and important questions at the right time. So thank you so much. And for all of you participants, thank you for spending your time listening. I hope I added some value to your knowledge and understanding of sustainability. Feel free to reach out to me. As you can see, my email address and my phone number is right there. And happy sustainability, guys. Vanita, anything else you'd like to say?
That's all, Dipti. Thank you so much. We know this collective has touch points from cradle to career and beyond, even to grave, as they say. And there's so much we can do. It's a massive undertaking. There's some days where motivation and drive has to be a large part of your own makeup, I think, and strength. And that's where we also pull on, colleagues to help through. So thank you, Dipti, so much. Thank you for joining us on this Day 5 Inspired Conference with this just information-packed session on sustainability. Thank you, Dipti Kumar.
Thank you, Vanita.